Tomorrow, folks. How are you this fine day? Excellent, excellent. Well, they tell me you've come to hear about mine own self, my life, and such. Is this true? What life is like here in my own time? Great, well. I think the best thing to do at this point is to get you back in time even before mine own self, so that you know where I am come from. Do you know much of English history? Not you. You be quiet. Anyone else know much of English history? You have heard of the great King Henry VIII? Right. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Right? 6 wives he had, not all at the same time. He never was to be king. He had an older brother that was supposed to be king. So Henry became a great athlete. He excelled at tennis. He was one of the best tennis players in all of England. Perhaps because he was the prince. But he was one of the best tennis players there were. And his stature. Here is a man that was head and shoulders above the rest. Most English are 5'7", 5'8", 5'9" maybe. Henry was 6'2" tall. A great athlete. And he participated in another sport that many think too dangerous to play in themselves today. Have you heard of jousting? When you get on horseback in full armor and ride at another person on horseback in full armor. He did this for fun. That's the kind of person he was. Well, when his older brother died, and Henry knew he had to become king, he also took a wife, who happened to have been his brother's wife. Princess Catherine of Spain, the daughter of the King of Spain. Allying the 2 great countries who had always been at war, and tying them together in bonds of matrimony as well as peace. And they had a daughter. The daughter's name was Mary. This is important later. And they were married for a good 20-some years before Henry decided that he no longer needed Catherine as a wife, for she refused to give him a male heir. And with all the history before this with the Tudors, and the strife and the civil war that had been there before, Henry wanted to assure that that would stop and that he would have a male heir. And so, since he blamed it upon his wife, he sought from the Pope a divorce or an annulment from his marriage with Catherine. There was one small problem. Catherine was the Pope's niece. You see where that's going to cause a problem. With the refusal of the divorce, Henry took matters into his own hands, because that's the kind of person he was, and created for himself and for all of the English, mind you, the Church of England, with himself at its head, granted himself his divorce, and married Anne Boleyn. And with Anne Boleyn, he had another daughter, Elizabeth. This will be important later. And he got rid of her quite quickly, a year or so, and this went on. He finally did have a son, Edward, the future king. Henry, unfortunately, did not live forever. He was a great, strong king and good for England. When Henry died, Edward becomes king. And Edward did not so much like the Church of England. He certainly did not like the Roman Catholic Church. He liked the Presbyterian Church. So now everyone in England who had been Roman Catholic, then became Church of England, must now join the Presbyterian Church. Edward only lived for a very short time as king. And when Edward dies, Mary, remember, becomes queen. Mary, being the niece of the Pope, wants everyone in England to join back with the Roman Catholic Church. Now, when Henry started the Church of England, he seized the property of the Roman Catholic Church, the monasteries, the lands, the incomes, and gave them out to his friends. When Edward wanted everyone to become part of the Presbyterian Church, he took that property and gave it to his friends. It creates support, you understand. So Mary now takes all that property back, gives it back to the Roman Catholic Church, and persecutes, almost the same word, everyone that had taken that land as heretics. She goes around the country making sure that everyone that even blinks when she mentions that everyone must now become a Roman Catholic is executed, jailed, tortured. This persecution goes on for years, and so much so that she earns himself a nickname, Bloody Mary. She did not reign for long. She is replaced by her younger half-sister, Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth wanted to be seen as a strong, independent woman and to be her father's daughter. So she now has everyone join back to the Church of England, whether they like it or not. The good thing about Elizabeth is that she did reign for many, many, many years, 50-some years if I do remember correctly. England is now a good, strong nation, has had a war with Spain. But Elizabeth is getting older. She never married, so she never has a legitimate heir. This is getting people afraid. People in England are thinking back to the War of the Roses, that this might happen again. Someone struggling over who the next heir is going to be. But she did have a cousin who was king of the land to the north. James VI was king of Scotland, and he was her cousin's son, so it's nephew, I guess. It's one of those strange royal relationships. So James VI of Scotland was wise in politics. And he did go around to all the various religious groups, including this new one that was popping up, who wanted to take the Church of England and purify it, bring it back to its roots, make it simpler, get rid of all the trappings of the Roman Catholic Church. They were called, mockingly, Puritans. He did go along to all these religious groups and say, if you support me to become the next king, I promise there will be no persecutions against you. If you all do this for me, I will make sure that you all live safely and in peace here in England, as good Englishmen. They all did believe him, and there was universal support for James VI of Scotland at the death of Elizabeth, which one was never allowed to mention, would then become the next king, which did happen in 1603. Elizabeth passes, James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England, and promptly breaks every single one of those promises. The first ones to rise up against him are the Roman Catholics, in a devious plot to destroy the entire kingdom, to behead it, if you would. The plot was to blow up Parliament, with the royal family in session. All the royal family, the king, the queen, the children, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, would all be destroyed with 35 barrels of gunpowder planted underneath the House of Parliament. This gunpowder plot, as they call it, is still celebrated in England on the day it was discovered, November 5th, 1605. It was a plot throughout the land, they found, that there were Roman Catholics everywhere, under every bush, if you would, plotting to support this once the action had been taken. There were persecutions across the country. One of those involved in the prosecution of the criminals themselves was my mentor, Sir Edward Coke, Member of Parliament and Chief Justice of England. He was the chief prosecutor in the trials of the likes of Guy Fawkes and Catesby and all the rest. That is the world I grew up in. Everyone looking under bushes for religious dissidents, for spies, for treachery, everywhere. This is the world I grew up in the center of it in London. My father was a merchant tailor. That's not just someone that sells suits. They make the great bespoke suits for those that go to Parliament, those that go to court. These are the people coming to my father's shop. Across the street, my mother is running an inn, where the likes of John Smith from Virginia fame are visiting, and I sit by the fire listening to his stories as I grow. And it's during this time, Sunday service at St. Sepulchre, as I'm a young lad, I had taught myself a method of taking down speeches as I heard them. It's a short scribbling way of writing called shorthand. And you can take down word for word what a person is speaking as they say it. It's remarkable. But while I was doing this, the church warden did come along and grab me by the scruff of the neck and take me out underneath the steeple. And they were going to beat me for not paying attention and for just scribbling during the middle of the masses, when Sir Edward Coke comes along and notices and says, if he says that's word for word, have him read it back. Which I did. Sir Edward Coke saw the promise in this. He did send me to Charterhouse School, and then later on to Cambridge University. It was at Pembroke College in Cambridge. It's a beautiful place. The lawns, the bowling greens. It's absolutely beautiful and peaceful and quiet, but that all hides the fact that everyone is spying on everyone else. And there are extreme radicals there of all sorts. There are extreme Puritans, there are extreme Church of England, there are Roman Catholics everywhere. And each is looking for that one little word out of your mouth to turn you into the authorities. After I left Cambridge, I was selected to be chaplain at Oates Manor in Essex. It's a beautiful little place. I ended up marrying Mary Barnard in this beautiful All Saints Church. It is such a lovely place. The countryside rolls away from it on all sides. An All Saints Church inside is pure whitewash. It's glorious. It is, at the heart, what a Puritan church should be. The trappings of the Roman Catholic Church are long gone. There are no statues, there are no crucifixes, there are no saints portrayed there. It is a house of God. It is simple, it is pure. But the pressures in England are mounting, and more people are leaving England for this new world across the Atlantic. For they fear persecution, they will not change their minds. Friends of mine had left years before and come across the ocean, and closer friends left in 1630 and started the settlements in Boston and Salem. I did see the writing on the walls. I knew that the only real safety with the persecutions of Archbishop Laud going across the country for any recusant, as they called it, would be for me to come to this new world. Now, when they say new world, it truly is like a new world here. In England, if you go for a walk, the only thing you have to fear is other people. Here, there are poisonous snakes that rattle at you. There are bobcats and cougars. There are bears. There are wolves. And there are other people. In England, if you go a-hunting, which just the nobles do anyway, the deer they have is a red deer. It is about so high and so big. Here there are moose. In London, a freezing cold winter day is just around freezing, where the snow falls and dusts everything and then is gone by the morning. Here the snow is hip deep and the cold is so that the ocean itself freezes over. A summer day in England, well, at Cambridge, not too long ago, a friend of mine got married there. Going to have an outdoor wedding. It's going to be beautiful, but it was so hot that they feared that the people would be passing out in the heat. It was all of 75 degrees. Here, well, when they settled Plymouth, people were dying from the heat working in the fields. It is a new world, and it takes a tremendous voyage to get here. It takes 2 months to cross the ocean. 2 months. What were you doing 2 months ago? Here we are, mid-June, mid-May, mid-April. Let's stretch it a little bit. Go back to the 1st of April. Picture all the food that you have had to eat from April 1st until today. Dry it, smoke it, salt it, pack it into wooden barrels and put it in the bottom of the ship. Everything you have had to drink from the 1st of April until today. Pack that into wooden barrels and put that in the bottom of the ship. Now, in a small area, far smaller than this, but from the second table there to here, and about the width from that pine tree to where you're sitting, 100 people taking passage on this ship. From the 1st of April until today, we are packed all in together. There is no such thing as privacy. None have had a bath or a good washing from the 1st of April until today. You can imagine the smell. Have any of you spent time on board a ship or a boat? What happens to your clothing?
Dirty.
Well, aside from dirty.
Salty.
It gets salty.
And?
They begin to fade. Sweat.
Wet. It gets wet.
Oh.
This is wool. Feel.
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of wet.
Okay. When this gets wet, have you not smelled wet wool? It smells like a wet dog. And there's 100 of us, having the waves crash upon the ship, getting our clothing wet, not having a bath, in this area so packly tight, for 2 months. Has anyone ever been up on the ocean itself? Where the ship does rock back and forth and pitch up and down? Have you seen people seasick? There are buckets, but that is it. For 2 months you do this. And if you do encounter a storm at sea, well, on land these storms may break branches off trees, they may rattle windows, they may take pieces of the roof away. But then it moves out to sea and lifts the ocean itself up. And that boat that you're on is tossed about the way a cat plays with a mouse. What was the deck is now the bulkhead. And the waves crash over the entire ship, getting you again soaked to the skin, and then goes to the bottom of the ship where the food is stored. What happens to dried food if it gets wet and sits there for a month?
Pretty bad.
It rots, it grows mold. What the rats do not eat, you have rotten and moldy food and no place to stop to get more. This is just to get across the ocean. For 2 months you do this. And then when you get here, I arrived in Boston in 1631. The town was established in 1630. There are no shops to go to get new clothing. There are no places to go to get better food. You're living in other people's houses for a short time until you can get a place of your own. That's what it's like just across the ocean. And I arrived there and I noticed that the way Winthrop and the rest had set up the town of Boston was no different than what was going on in England. They had left England because they would not submit to the will of government in the matters of religion. They knew they were right. But over here they just changed the labels and made the same rules. You must submit to them or not be part of government. I told them they were making a mistake and would not be part of their ministry, if you say so. So I left and went to Salem, where I did become the minister there, but Boston magistrates put pressure on Salem to have me leave, for they did not like my attitude towards them. So I did. I left Salem and went to the older town, Plymouth. It had been founded in 1620 by a group of religious refugees from the Netherlands, Englishmen who had gone to the Netherlands for so-called religious freedom. They feared that their children were growing up as Dutch children, not English children. So they did leave Holland, go back to England, and then come all the way over here to this new England. They had a small settlement, but they were not Puritans. They were separatists. They wished to break entire from the Church of England and have each congregation be their own entity. They would elect their minister. They would have no bishops, no cardinals, no hierarchy outside of the congregation. They did select me as a teacher there and to help the minister. One of the first things that I said was that a minister should not be paid. That makes one a mercenary. You should do it for the love of God and nothing else. You should be a working member of the community. Now, what skills did I have to offer? I am a city boy. I am no farmer. I'm certainly no fisherman. And none of us were hunters. But I did know trade. Coming from London, and seeing what my father had done to get the materials for these bespoke suits, I knew how to make trade and how to make deals. I had observed that my father, when a ship came in from Italy, he could speak Italian to the men on board. And before anyone else can get the deal for the cargo of silks that were coming from the Far East on Italian ships, he had the deal. And I did perceive that this might be a lesson here, because there were people that were living here. The natives to this place, to the east of where we are now, the Wampanoag, to the south of us, the Narragansett. I knew how to earn my living. I took English goods, knives, kettles, hoes, axes, blankets, coats, and did go among the Wampanoag and the Hagansel, and did learn their language, learn how they live. Does anyone speak more than one language here? When you learn a language, it's not just word substitution, is it? There's entire ideas that sometimes it's a phrase for a word, but you learn something about those people, the way that they think about the world. And that is what it was with me and the natives to this place. For the rest of you, I will give an example. When in English, a single piece of paper is called a sheet, there is also a sheet of wood, a sheet of glass. There are blank planes that things can be done with. In French, it's une feuille de papier, a leaf of paper. And all of a sudden, a whole spectrum of ideas appears in front of you that you would not think of before. Not a sheet, something to cover, something to be part of, but a leaf floating from a tree. These ideas come with a new language. And with the Native Americans living hereabouts, I did learn how they lived, how they hunted, how they fished, how they used this land. These great people that live here, they are great hunters, they are great fishermen, and they are also farmers. Each family takes an acre of land, and upon that acre plants their main crops, the corn, the beans, and the squash. Unlike the way the English do, when the English take a field, they plow it up with deep plows cutting deep into the earth and plant one crop in a field so it's easier to harvest. Here, the Native Americans, they will take 1 acre of land for a family, and with their hoes, they break it up and mound it up all across that acre, and then in each mound they will plant corn, beans, and squash. The corn does grow straight up. The beans grow up the cornstalk, and the squash goes out and covers the ground in between these plants, all three supporting each other. And when you take corn, beans, and squash and put them in a pot together with some meat or some fish, you have a wonderful, wonderful meal that they call succotash. Their corn meal makes for small cakes that preserve well. You can see the natives traveling with a small sack about the size of a quart, filled with this parched corn that they do carry with them, and either take a handful and munch it down, or take and mix it with some water and drink it down, and that takes care of them for an entire day. They can travel many a day. The runners, the swimmers, they are amazing in this area. Many a time when I've taken a boat down the bay, I've had native people come out to me, swimming out to the boat, and get on board. Sometimes they would take me in one of their canoes from Providence down south. They are wonderful people, with some of them with a great sense of humor. They know I do not swim. So as we are going down the bay, they start rocking the boat and say, "Do not worry, Mr. Williams, we will take care of you if we fall in the water." This place here was a great salt cove. From where we stand literally right now, this was the beach. Going around that great hill there, all the way over to the far side of the city, and coming back along almost to where the meeting house is now for that First Baptist Church. That was all open water. The Woonasquatucket River goes to the west. The Mushasik goes to the north. 2 places in this cove, there were oyster beds with oysters a foot across. We could go at low tide with baskets and pick up lobsters to feed to the pigs here. There were eels, there were ducks and geese, and the salmon. Where Webosset is down here, there is a ford across where the Great Highway does cross the water and go to the southwest, all the way to Manhattan. Goes from the Massachusetts Bay, this road here, this high street, crosses at Webosset, goes to Manhattan. It's an Indian highway, was here long before we English got here. But at that ford, at Webosset, at low tide, the salmon, who are coming in to go up 2 rivers, are stuck until the tide shifts. And these are not small salmon like you see in England. These are 50, 60, 70 pound apiece. So many waiting for the tide to shift that This is an exaggeration, but you could walk across the river on their backs without getting your feet wet. But you need no equipment. You can literally go down and pick them up and take them on shore. Smoke them, they last all year. We grow apple trees on the slopes of the hill here. We have food that will last all winter with that. For if the crops fail for some reason, you must have something to fall back on. But the native peoples did use this as a gathering pot. The Wampanoag, the Nahigansuk, the Nipmuc, and the Massachusetts did all come here, say, when the salmon were running. And they would settle disputes. They would have great games up on the plain. When you get a bunch of people together, think about this. They had great feasts. They settled disputes. They started arguments. Children fell in love. This was a great gathering place because here also is a freshwater spring. Thousands would come here in season, utilize this place, and then go home. This was a great resource for them. And by the time I got here, it was under control of the Nahigansuk. I was in Plymouth. There were no small disputes with the people at Plymouth and myself. And I went back up to Salem. There, I did preach that it was not right for a minister to be paid. There, I did say that if you wish to live here, make a deal with the Native Americans, for it is surely their land that we are living on. Talk to them. Make some sort of a deal with them for the land. You cannot just take it because the King James or Charles says that this is yours now. It's not the king's land. These people, the native people here, utilize every bit of this land. They don't have small fenced-in plots. The entire area is part of their food resources. They set fire to the woods every year. That gets rid of the ticks and the fleas, the poisonous plants, the small insects that bother you constantly. And the first to grow back are the grasses and the berry bushes. The trees that survive this burning are the oak, the hickory, the walnut, the chestnut. So grasses, berries, and nuts make it a great place for deer and for bear. And it is as open as a park in England is, with great strength of trees. Stand up, sir. Stand up. Stand up. Come here. Stretch out your arms. Trees this big or bigger. Common everywhere around here of oak, hickory, chestnut, walnut, tall, straight trees. That's what we have here. I'm up in Salem and saying that the king cannot give away this land because it is not his to do. The authorities in Massachusetts Bay did not like this. But then I did go by their standards too far. I did say, the government can control what you do, but it cannot control what you think or what you believe. That is solely up to you. This was too much for the magistrates in Boston. They did arrest me, bring me back down to Boston, and offer to free me if I would change my mind publicly and just make an apology for being so wrong. I could not do this. So they charged me with having new and dangerous opinions against the authority of the magistrates. If my opinions are dangerous to the magistrates, then so be it. When I refused to change my mind, when I refused to retract my statements, they did banish me. They gave me a short amount of time to leave, as long as I promised not to preach my dangerous opinions in church, which, seeing no alternative, did agree to. Went back up to Salem to mine own house, and kept my word, did not preach those dangerous opinions in church. We had discussions about these ideas at my own kitchen table after Sunday services. The house was more crowded than the churches were. When the authorities in Boston heard of this, they became enraged and sent soldiers from Boston up to Salem to put me on the next ship back to England, saying that I had broken my word. I had not. but I had made some plans. When I heard the soldiers were coming, and someone did warn me, I shall not divulge the name for his sake. But John Cotton did say I was enlarged to the wilderness. John Cotton. I did escape. The soldiers are on their way, and I did escape. But this was a New England winter like most have never seen. The bay here was frozen solid. A Dutch ship tried to sail to Dutch Island that winter and could not get into the bay. There was hip-deep snow everywhere. And, as I said, I grew in a city. I'm used to roads and buildings and landmarks, and everything was covered with white. It was a very short time when I was just shivering, cold, curling up and thinking that was it, when a group of Wampanoag did find me. Warm me up, feed me, take me in, and bring me back down to their land. They treated me with more kindness than my own people. In the spring, I did talk to Osamiquin, you may know him as Massasoit, and he did give me land across the Seekonk River for me to have a place to live. People from Salem came down, we started building our houses when Winslow from Plymouth did write me a letter saying, "We love you, brother, but you're still within the boundaries of our colony, and as much as we love you, we love Massachusetts better. You must leave. Just go across the Seekonk, which is our boundary, and we can all live in brotherhood together." I did go across the Seekonk and encountered a group of Narragansett at a great rock down here. They shouted out to me, "What cheer, Neetop?" which is a nice mixture of English and their own language. This is not a formal greeting. What cheer? What cheery news do you bring? It's a familiar greeting. It's among friends. Neetop is their word for friend. This is what you would say to a comrade that you haven't seen in a while. What cheer, Neetop? And I told them of my predicament. They said, "We have a place for you." They said, "Go around the point of land and come up the Great Salt River. We'll go over the top of the hill and meet you at the spring." And I did come up this river here. And they did explain that this place could be a place for me to live. We did go out to Nutaconkinut Hill, to the west of here. And from the top of that hill, they did raise their arms and say, "This much we give you, from the falls of Pawtucket to the falls at Patuxent, with the Seekonk as the back. We give you this." You must understand these people. If they see something on you that they admire, they will compliment it and expect you to give it to them. If you see something on them and make the compliment to it, they will doff it immediately and give it to you. For there is great prestige in giving something of value away. And this was not a purchase from them. This was not in any way bought from them. They did give this to me. There's an expectation when a gift is given that there's something in return. There was nothing that I had that I could give them except for myself, my friendship, and my love. And the promise that I would work with them as neighbors. And that's what we did. We were to be neighbors here. When the Narragansett needed an emissary to the English, when they needed letters written, and when they needed something interpreted, when they needed someone to be the go-between with the other English, it was I that did this. When Canonicus or Miantanomi or any of their leaders needed something written so that the English in Boston would know what their heart was, they would come to me and I would write this out for them, and a runner would get it up to Boston within the day. I would advocate for them. If there was a dispute, I would be their advocate. That was the expectation. And if they needed something from me, Canonicus or Miantanomi, some English goods, they could just have it. With their generosity, all I could do was be generous in return. If you see Plymouth, there's a wall around it. When a Wampanoag or another native does come up to visit Plymouth, he must announce himself from outside the gates, put down his weapons, and be escorted in for business, and then escorted back out. Boston has a wall around it with the same rules. New Amsterdam, now called New York, has a wall around it with the same rules. All these English settlements, they're based on fear of the people that live next to them. There was never a wall here. This road, which was their highway for centuries before the English got here, was still their highway. We lived as neighbors here. When people came here, we had no charter from the king or a compact as the people at the Mayflower and Plymouth have. So we needed to find a way to run our businesses. So we did sit down and agree that heads of households would meet every fortnight and decide by majority vote what would happen in this town, but in civil things only. Here we would make no religious rules, for the persecution of the ages is based on the government telling people how to worship God. Here, your conscience would be your own. It is your liberty to have that. Here, God would not need a civil sword of steel to enforce the sword of the Spirit. If God's word is not enough, that civil sword will only make a nation of hypocrites. Here, something was going to be different. This was a blank slate. We're not going to make the same mistakes that the Massachusetts Bay had been making. This was going to be a place where people could live together from different faiths. No religious rules. Cotton mocked it, sent me a letter on why I was wrong about this separation of church and state, which I eventually got to answer him in the form of a book. I did take his letter and turn it into a dialogue between truth and peace. You may read it if you wish. It's called The Bloody Tenant of Persecution. But people came here from all over. We were not here 2 years when Anne Hutchinson is tossed out of the Massachusetts Bay for her heretical beliefs, and she, with the others, sought my help for the settlement on Aquidneck, called Portsmouth now. People did break away from Portsmouth and start the town of Newport shortly thereafter. And then Samuel Gorton was kicked out of Plymouth for his dispute with the justices and the magistrates there. Is kicked out of Portsmouth, comes here and is so radical, saying that if the way they do business in Providence is that the majority votes for what is to happen, I'm as good a judge of my own future as any of them are. I do not need to submit to that. He went down to the new settlement at Patuxet, gets into a dispute about cattle grazing, moves further south to Charlotte, starts a settlement there. And gets the English in Boston so mad they send soldiers down to Charlotte to arrest him. Something they never did for me. And after a week-long gun battle, they did arrest Gorton and the others and bring them back up to Boston. Well, Gorton is a smart one. He wrote to the Commissioner of the Colonies saying, I am not, nor never have been, a subject of the Massachusetts Bay. I am a king's subject and demand the king's justice. This is brilliant. For the Commissioner of the Colonies did then do the equivalent of smacking the Boston on the back of the head and say, give him back his land, give him back his goods, and restore him to his place. Samuel Gorton goes back down and renames the settlement in honor of the Commissioner of the Colonies, the Earl of Warwick. He starts the town of Warwick. Now, upon hearing what Samuel Gorton had done, the Narragansett leaders, who had had problems with Massachusetts Bay, did say, why did Massachusetts let you go? And Gorton explained to them that we are no subject of Massachusetts Bay, we are subject of the king. The Narragansett said, can we be subject of the king so Massachusetts will leave us alone? And Gorton said yes, and drew up the document of surrender, if you would, that The people and princes, known as the Narragansett, would now become directly subject to the King of England. Court cases would be heard in Rhode Island courts, but they are subjects of the king. These towns developed. People not just from England came here. People from all over the world. A group of Jews from Brazil came to Newport and established a synagogue here. And more people came from England, including one George Fox, sets up a group down in Newport called the Quakers. These people are very disruptive. They disrupt public meetings, they refuse military service in the militia. To prove them wrong, I went down in a boat to Newport to have a debate with them. And for 3 days I did argue with them about the value of their faith and how incorrect it was. After 3 days of debate, I came back up here and wrote a book that is a point-by-point argument about why these Quakers are wrong. It's called George Fox Digged Out of His Burrows. Yet not once was a Quaker threatened with punishment. Not once was he threatened with jail. All were free to follow their own conscience. My next-door neighbor here, across this street, Joshua Varon, he did come down because his wife was one of the followers of my congregation, if you would. His wife and his mother-in-law. He did think that she attended too many of my services on Wednesday and on the Sabbath. To prevent her, because he felt neglected, he beat her, endangering her life. Now, it was not incorrect for a husband to correct his wife. This was allowed. This was under English statute. As a matter of fact, there's an old saying, what is it now? A wife, a spaniel, a walnut tree. The more you beat them, the better they be. Now, this is not how I believe, but it is legal to administer corrections to children or to your wife if they are disobedient. But it is not legal in any way, shape, or form to endanger their life. And that's what he was doing. We brought him up on those charges, but not for endangering her life, but for interfering with her liberty of conscience. This is a first. Nowhere else had anyone thought that a wife has the right to have her own conscience. We did this here. It's not a happy ending. The town voted to disenfranchise Joshua Varon. Some of the town offered to get Jane, his wife, a new husband so she could stay here and freely exercise her conscience. She refused. And he did tie her up and drag her back up to Salem. There was no little turmoil here with this level of freedom that we did offer. Each of these towns is going in their own separate direction since none of us have legitimate papers from the Crown. Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, and Connecticut are all looking to get land on Narragansett Bay. For here, sailing south from here to the other colonies, to Bermuda, to the southern colonies, to the Caribbean, is where all the other settlements are that have money, have valuable things that we can trade for. From Newport to Bermuda is 3 to 4 days sail. From Boston to Bermuda is 7 to 10 days. From Connecticut, you have to come to Narragansett Bay before you can turn south. Connecticut has Long Island in the way. It has no great port. So Connecticut wanted part of Narragansett Bay. Plymouth, they have small ports like New Bedford, but it's sandy. It's not as good a strong, sturdy, quiet port as the Rhode Island has. They all wanted a piece of this. Boston wanted to have Patuxent with its small harbor, but it's on the bay. So I had to make 2 trips back to England to get the documentation for this colony. The first I made in 1642. got a patent from Parliament, for this is at the very beginning of the English Civil War. The king had been driven from London by Parliament and set up his flag at Worcester. In a way, this was lucky for me. The people in Parliament were all aware of who I was, for Sir Edward Coke had been one of their leaders in challenging the powers of the king. They knew I was Cook's boy. So when I went and asked them and talked to them, they all knew who I was, and I was not making an outrageous request, and they did give us a patent, which I did return with. And there was great acclaim, everyone was cheering, except for the Coddingtons down in Newport. They had great ambition for themselves. William did declare himself governor for life of Aquidneck, part of Connecticut, and parts of the mainland. The colony was fracturing even as it was forming. Newport was upset that they were not at the top bill, for the name of this colony was Providence Plantations in Narragansett Bay in New England in America. It's a lot. But Newport was not mentioned, and they were upset with this. That's why Coddington took off on his own. So I took a leading member of Newport Society, Dr. John Clark. He and myself went back to England and did work with the Commonwealth. Did stay there for a couple of years, but business called me back to here, and John Clark did stay and did work hard with the Commonwealth, and then with the restoration of Charles II, he did work a political game himself. Charles II, King of England, in exile in Catholic France, head of the Church of England, given protection in Catholic France, had seen the turmoil under the Commonwealth that various religious groups had caused, had been exposed to this new way of looking at the world through science and this Renaissance, and comes back to England looking for a way to change and fix things. He's a patron of the arts, he's a patron of the sciences, and John Clark sits there and explains that this place, this Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, could be an experiment to see if you can have a good government separate from religion. And for King Charles II, this sounded like a good idea. It's small enough and far enough away that you can try this here. But like all politics, there's more to it than that. When Charles came back to the throne, the regicides, the people that had killed his father and formed the Commonwealth, were still in abundance, and he did have them arrested, tried, and executed. When that started, many fled and came to Massachusetts Bay and Connecticut. He was not going to send troops over here to arrest them. He was not going to send spies over here to assassinate them. But what he could do, and this is sly politics, is give them a nightmare. For Massachusetts Bay and Connecticut are good theocracies, with religious governments going to show England how to fix themselves and correct themselves. So what's the worst thing you can put right in between them but a place with complete religious freedom? What does the king get out of it? Revenge. We're the thorn in the side of these theocracies. The Quakers did help us out in that event. It did cost some of them their lives, but at the same time, southeastern Massachusetts and what it was the Plymouth colony became saturated with Quakers. Plymouth had demanded that we turn Quakers over to them as being an illegal group. Our response to them was, we have no laws that allow us to do this. What we did was create a refuge in this colony for anyone persecuted for their conscience. Whether they be from Brazil, as the Jews in Newport were, from England, the Native Americans could practice their own beliefs here without persecution. Where does the government get its authority? Aye. In that book, The Bloody Tenant, I wrote that the sovereign, original, and foundation of civil power lies in the people. To create a government that fits their needs, that has as much power and lasts as long as they determine it should. And that's what we did here. When we received our charter from the king, we, the people of Rhode Island and Providence plantations, could elect our own governor, elect our own corporation or the General Assembly. These were going to be our neighbors here. People that were answerable not to the king, but to us here. This was a level of freedom that no other colony and hardly any nation in the world had seen before. This liberty that we were given. And in truth, my friends, this liberty is extremely fragile. And if the foundation of civil power lies in the people, whose responsibility is it then to make sure that this fragile gift that was given to us is maintained? Who? Us. Not them, not someone else. Each and every one of us has that responsibility. It is ours to protect, ours to raise our voice, ours to tell them no or yes. I did write a letter once to Charles I, telling him he was committing a sin by giving away land that did not belong to him. I was telling the king something he did not want to hear. Do you think the charges against me of having new and dangerous opinions against the authority of the magistrates, this place is not part of anything else that existed. This is different. We all have a say in what happens here. And that's what's important about this place. It is our responsibility to make sure this does not disappear for our children or our children's children. It is a responsibility to all of us. You got that?
Amen.